Welcome, everyone. So good to have you in this space. I know that people are connecting to audio and their visuals. We will continue to allow people into this space as they come. But since we're starting a minute or so, a couple minutes over, I thought we would go ahead and get started. Really quickly, for accessibility, we have our ASL interpreters here. If you need captions, you can click there are three little dots at the bottom of your Zoom screen that you should be able to select captions if you need them. I welcome everybody. If you have capacity to have your camera on so we can see your beautiful faces, I would welcome that so much. And also, I want to acknowledge that Zoom burnout, screen burnout is a real thing. So take care of yourself. That is totally fine. I'm going to drop a little sign-in sheet. I know, y'all, if you have ever been in a SACA meeting with me, you know already that I'm not the most tech-savvy person. So there's probably a cooler, easier way to do this. I don't know what that is. If you do, you can send me a message about it, but I'm going to put a link in the chat. This will allow you to sign up let me find the chat, just so that we have your name, what organization you're affiliated with, and your email, because I want us to be able to send you notes. Stas and Leander want to be able to send you just recap on the stuff that we discussed today, and also more information about their organization Spring Up, which is out of Denver, Colorado. And then I want to be able to send the recording to each of you after. Just so you know, I want you to be able to speak freely into this space. So when I take the video and edit it, we're recording this webinar. I can edit out your comments. If anybody feels uncomfortable with hey, I don't want my questions or comments to be heard, just send me a message, and I'm happy to protect that anonymity in this space. So we're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Alina Duncan. My pronouns are he, him. I am the director of Seattle Arts and Culture for Anti-Racism. And this is the second part of our series in restorative justice. So the first series that we did in restorative justice, we had people from Oakland, from Seattle, from LA, who are doing restorative justice work, mostly in criminal justice spaces. One of the things that I've been hearing a lot within the arts and culture sector and with some colleagues throughout the city is we don't have processes for harm repair that are even close to restorative justice principles. They're very based on, gaslighting. Hey, that's not what your manager said. That's not actually what happened to you. He said he wouldn't do it again. We welcome everybody. We don't want to call anybody out or make anybody uncomfortable. Not really rooted in, are we centering the person's needs who's been harmed, but also saying, hey, we believe in the capacity of the person that caused harm to also show up and adjust their behavior and to do something different, to create an environment within our workplaces that is holistic and that centers repair. So the first series we learned about, you can find that on our website. What is restorative justice? That's usually used in a lot of criminal justice spaces, not in arts and culture spaces, but we're trying to shift that so that we can create these processes of harm repair that are more holistic. So today's workshop, we're going to be defining accountability and then trying to identify what are the barriers to harm repair. You probably already have thoughts or feelings that are happening in your body around, okay, I have some ideas of what might be a barrier to harm repair and to healing, and we're going to get into that. We always do this at our SACA workshops. We're going to go ahead and do our land acknowledgements and emotional labor acknowledgements. I'm in a different part of the country right now. I am in Shreveport, Louisiana. So my acknowledgement will look a little bit different or sound a little different than it would if you're in Washington. And I'm sure Stas and Leander would have a different one being in Colorado. But I would like to acknowledge that we live, work, and play on the traditional territories of the Caddo, Yatasi, Huapa, and OCH tribes, and that I occupy this land. For those of you in Seattle, Hurons, the Coast Salish people, Snohomish, Snoqualmie, Duwamish, Muckleshoot tribes. This acknowledgement does not take the place of authentic relationships with Indigenous communities, but serves as a first step in honoring the land that we're on. We mentioned this in SACA meetings in general, but also it's an important reminder that as our organizations begin to build relationships with Native and Indigenous communities, that we're not just ending with the land acknowledgement. A lot of Native and Indigenous communities are like, your land acknowledgements are empty unless there's meaningful relationship there, unless your solidarity is actionable. So as we're thinking through this land acknowledgement, how is your organization, or even you as an individual, making your solidarity with Indigenous communities actionable? Maybe if you're in Seattle, you pay real rent to the Duwamish as a occupier of that land. Maybe that's a way that you can show solidarity with that. What are some steps that you can take that further if you're already paying rent? Perhaps your organization doesn't pay rent. Maybe that's an active thing that that you can work on with your org. But how are we building relationships with the Native and Indigenous communities around us? The other thing that we do at SACA, especially because we're a mixed race collective, is we always give an emotional labor acknowledgement. So I'd like to acknowledge that emotional labor is the need for one group to regulate their emotions to satisfy another group, usually the group holding the most power. We want to acknowledge the diversity present and not present in this space. This group is currently comprised of predominantly white folks, and white folks inherently hold more power in our current social system. We also want to recognize that the folks of color in this cohort are inherently carrying the abundance of emotional labor, both in this room and on a daily basis as they navigate the world, many of them navigating multiple systems of oppression. We thank and honor those that do the emotional labor, and we agree not to exploit it. We acknowledge the need to hold this emotional labor as a group, and it is a goal of this cohort for the folks that do not tend to hold the weight of emotional labor to accept the complexity and pervasiveness of emotional labor. We talk about this as a mixed race collective in SACA a lot, that it is a privilege to come into these spaces and to show up and to learn about racism rather than learning about it by experiencing it. And I always ask for people to either give me a real thumbs up or an emoji thumbs up of like, hey, I consent to hold this emotional labor as a group, as a collective. If folks don't have capacity to do that, maybe this isn't the space for you today, but wanting just some acknowledgement and consent, like, hey, I'm on board with this. Seeing lots of thumbs up. Thank you for sharing this space with us and for consenting to this, this acknowledgement. I appreciate that. Okay, we're gonna jump in and get started. Full disclosure, one of our panelists had to, she's not able to make it. She had a family emergency and had to catch a flight this morning. So wanting to send lots of just tenderness and some peace her way. I know it's not the last time that we'll get a chance to work with Amalia, but I'm so, y'all, we've been watching that Barnard series on Center for Research for Women. You probably recognize Stas and Leander from that series that we've been watching. And I am so excited. I will not geek out. I'll geek out later. That they said yes, and that they are willing to come and share their expertise, their wisdom, their experience, and how we can start applying those principles of restorative justice to our work in the arts and culture sector. We talk a lot about how do we not keep our sectors so divided. There are things that we can learn from practices within the arts and culture world, within the criminal justice world, within city systems. And maybe that means we're creating different ways of being. I hope that means we're creating different ways of being. So real quick, I just want to read their bio a little bit for you. I'm sorry if this is embarrassing. We'll get through this really quickly. Leander uses they and he pronouns. Stas, they and them pronouns. Founded the organization Spring Up in 2013 to build community of practice embodying consent and liberation within our relationships, creative spaces, and daily lives. Stas and Leander have been facilitators and trainers in transformative justice for 5 years, supporting member-based organizations, campuses, and restorative justice programs to adopt practices of community-based harm prevention and response. They were contributors to the Barnard Center Research on Women Building Accountable Communities educational video series in 2019, which I just mentioned. And both have gone through several circle training programs, Stas co-facilitating the pilot RCC juvenile felony diversion case in Miami-Dade County. For 10 years, Spring Up has used fiction, art, role play, and community education to popularize their skills and frameworks necessary to be free together at Blue Light Academy of the Liberatory Arts. They have grown into a collective of 11 creatives, care workers, liberatory educators, transformative justice practitioners, and an alumni community of over 1,500 people. Spring Up hosts liberatory learning spaces through online classes, print materials, and curriculum, retreats, and coaching. They are a worker co-op, providing and receiving resources and support and reciprocal and accountable exchange with our community. Spring Up's core values are consent, accountability, and transformation. Thank you both so much for being here. I am so excited to have you. I wanted to give you an opportunity to introduce yourselves and anything you wanna share before we dive in.
Awesome. Thank you for such a warm and thoughtful welcome. It's really nice to be in the space with you all. We got to go to Seattle last summer for the Detention Watch Network convening, and it was my first time in Seattle, so it was really nice to kind of reconnect with community. We were there for Pride, so it feels like a good connection because we just had Pride last weekend as well. I will remember to slow down. I can speak very quickly, so I would just say, if y'all notice me speaking quickly, if you can type slow down in the chat or go like this, I know that it can help everyone keep up with what I'm saying, and that sometimes I just get into a bit of a zone. But so I'm Stas. I go by they, them pronouns. As Alina already mentioned, I'm one of the co-founders and vision keepers at Spring Up. I have been doing transformative justice work pretty much my whole life. I just didn't necessarily know to call it that until maybe 8 or 9 years ago, and then started feeling more confident training people in that framework and calling the trainings transformative justice about 5 years ago, through a lot of support and mentorship from folks that I've looked up to for a long time, like Mariam Kaba and Mimi Kim and Mia Mingus, Leah Lakshmi Piepsna Samarasina. Long names, I know. But these are all folks that have really shaped what it looks like for me to be doing this work, and kind of feel confident claiming what we do as transformative justice. But I do come up from a background in the arts. I grew up as an actor. My mom is an actor. My father is an artist. And so I'm really happy to be in conversation around what this looks like in the arts. We identify as a collective of creatives as well. Our co-founder, the third person who helped to found our collective, Shaina, has been my friend since we were 3 years old and is an artist, an abstract painter, graphic designer, and a big reason why, if you go on our website, there's lots of art everywhere. We really think about how we bring these abstract ideas into a visual and embodied realm to invite other people into it. So I'm really excited to have conversations with y'all about how this can connect with whatever it is that you all are doing.
Yeah, and did you want to share a visual description?
Oh yeah, and a visual description. I am a light-skinned Black non-binary person. I have blue hair with the shaved sides, blue curly afro with kind of a Y2K braids down in the front, and blue glasses and a very soft athletic polo with flowers on it.
Awesome, thank you. And my name is Leander. I go by he, they pronouns, and Stas and I have been partners in every sense for about 11 years now. We've been going through different phases of this collective that we founded for 10 years. And some of those phases have been very creatively focused. We wrote a book of fiction. We've done several visual arts projects. We've done things that use fashion and photography to try to be body positive and resist sexual assault. And so, yeah, I think that, this is also not that large of a group. And I definitely love if this is like more of a dialogue. And so I really would be, anything y'all want to share in the chat about your mediums or organizations or questions that you have. I know Alina has a, structure for this, but just personally, I do find it very helpful to kind of know who we're speaking with too. So just anything that you want to share in the chat, I'd be happy to hear about your work as well. I am a 32-year-old person of European descent. My ancestors immigrated to the US from Europe in various waves, primarily to the Midwest from Scandinavia about 150 years ago. I have, kind of medium length brown hair and glasses, and I'm wearing a blue, like short sleeve sweater.
It's knitted, it's very nice.
I'm also covered in cats. We have 4 cats and a dog, and so I'm sure they'll be making some appearances during this conversation today. But yeah, definitely grateful to be invited into this space and happy to really also get into questions about collectivity and equity. We've gone through, as I said, different formations. We're a multiracial collective. Right now, I am the only white person, although a number of people in our collective are mixed race and also have white parents.
Thank you so much for taking the time to expand on your work and introduce yourselves in a more intimate way for the people that are in this space. If people want to type in the chat, like your name or what organization you're here from, so that Stas and Leander kind of have an idea of who's in the space, that would be really cool as well. I love the idea of this being a dialogue. I feel like when we do panels, we always get to the end, we're like, crap, 20 minutes. Okay, let's have a really quick, it's not, it usually is 10 minutes because I'm not a good timekeeper because I'm trying to do too many things at once. So I will also try to slow down my pace so we can have some meaningful dialogue. Before I jump into the first question, again, I just want to reiterate, because I know some people have joined this meeting, but what I've heard a lot over the past year have been instances of harm that has happened in organizations, and rather it being a process that's really centered on the person that has been harmed, holding space for the person that's caused that harm and inviting them into this restoration process, asking questions like, what would it look like to reclaim your sense of safety or dignity, or what do you need? Here are some ideas I have. How do these feel for you in your body? Does this feel like something that supports this process of restoration? I'm sure I'm making a big assumption, but I would assume, based on the work that we've been doing with SACA this year, that most people are not getting those questions asked of them in our organizations, right? There's a lot of fear of being called out, being labeled racist, being labeled harmful. Someone might sue us. I get that a lot, this kind of fear of legality around taking accountability for when we cause harm, a lot of gaslighting. And so the whole intention behind this series is like acknowledging that we don't have to live in systems that way, that there are other ways of harm repair and accountability. I also want to acknowledge too that some of us might be in organizations that process may not be possible, and acknowledging that there is time and space where sometimes it's time to go for our own health, for our own well-being, for the sanctity and safety of our relationships, our mental health, our relationships with like our partners, our family, our kids, people. We spend so much time at work those things begin to impact us in other areas of our life. So wanting this space to be a space that all of you, I hope, can let your guard down a little bit, maybe take a deep breath and know that other ways of being are possible, and an opportunity for you to build community with each other. There's so many, if you're looking at the chat, there's so many different people from different organizations in this space. And one of the beautiful things about SACA is that we try to build collective power together. So maybe if you are the only person in your organization, maybe you're the only person of color, or you have another intersecting identity, or you're the only white person that's actually trying to transform things that are happening in your predominantly white organization, that you know that there are other people that are doing this work, and that, as cheesy as it sounds, we are collectively stronger together. So wanting to just name that into this space, and we're gonna dive in. If you have a question, I can't see all of you on the screen, so just pop your hand up or put it in the chat, and we'll get to that. So the first question I wanted to ask both of you, I think especially since the summer of 2020, we've heard the word accountability a lot. A lot of people are talking about accountability. It's now in people's strategic plans, or we're posting on social media about accountability, or we have things that, when we're writing grants, or maybe it's at the introduction of a theater play that we're doing. We're like, we are accountable to BIPOC communities, this community, that community, but I never hear people define what that actually means. When I say I'm accountable to XYZ, there's never any, this is what it looks like. And I'm curious to learn from both of you, like, how would you define accountability, and why would you define it that way? What is the thing that separates it from just like, yeah, I'm accountable to you?
Ooh, such a juicy question. Before we dive into responding to that, I just wanted to say thank you for introducing yourselves in the chat. It's been really interesting to read what you've been up to. I will just name, I'm so passionate about opera, so I'm really happy that there's someone from the opera here. That's super exciting for me, but also happy that you're all here. We would love to dive in on accountability and have a couple different ideas that we'd like to share. And so is it okay if we share our screen and show a couple slides? Okay, awesome.
Yeah, and I think that,
can you see our screen, everyone? Okay,
especially
awesome.
since you're asking about definitions, we would like to get a little bit more precise between personal accountability, community accountability.
I'm so sorry to interrupt. This is the interpreter speaking. I just want to make sure, because we're sharing a screen, that the interpreter is still visible, because I know that this is being recorded. It's just one moment for me. Thank
Yes,
you.
you're spotlighted, and so is Stas and Leander. Perfect.
Okay, thank
Awesome.
you.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Yes, I'm really glad you did that. Really wonderful.
Yes, so we'll be talking a little bit about our definitions of personal accountability, community accountability, and organizational accountability.
And so we wanted to start first with a quote that we will usually start our kind of trainings on accountability with, because we love the work of Mia Mingus. She's been a big influence in our lives. She's one of the founders of the disability justice movement, as well as thinking about kind of the framing of transformative justice. I think that I have the piece. I'll put in the link in the chat to this whole article of hers. But we like to start with this because I think it's a good kind of philosophical framing for what we hope accountability can feel like.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I invite you to, as we read this, really feel, how is this landing in your body? What feelings and sensations does this bring up as you listen to this? So I'll read from the slide. What if accountability wasn't scary? Take a breath and let that sink in for a second. What if accountability wasn't scary? It will never be easy or comfortable, but what if it wasn't scary? What if our own accountability wasn't something we ran from, but something we ran toward and desired, appreciated, held as sacred? What if we cherished opportunities to take accountability as precious opportunities to practice liberation, to practice love, to practice the kinds of people, elders to be, and souls we want to be, to practice that which we can only practice in real time? After all, we can only practice courage when we are afraid. We can only practice taking accountability when we have wronged or harmed or hurt. From Mia Mingus. And I'm curious if anyone wants to share in the chat how that felt for you. Definitely okay if you want to keep that more personal. But often we hear from people either that they feel a sense of just relief and letting go of the construct of perfectionism, which is itself a manifestation of white supremacy culture. This idea that we should never make mistakes, or that if we say or do something wrong, that we're going to get in trouble, right? And so we also sometimes hear from people that they feel a little discouraged by this, right? Just that, like, yeah, I felt a softening. Great. Seeing in the chat, I felt a relief, an absence of heaviness. This feels expansive in my body. Thank you for sharing.
And I just wanted to check in, are other folks able to see the interpreter while we're sharing our screen? Do we need to make any other changes? We're seeing nodding. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
And then this is the article that this is from, if you want to read more about this.
Awesome. And if you can't see the interpreter, you might need to change it so you can see more faces.
Yeah, deeply resonated with me, especially precious opportunities to practice love, more so in a relationship or community setting. Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think it's just important to start this by being like, the way that this is framed is often around rule breaking, which brings up baggage around punishment and around not being good enough or the right kind of person or leader or community member. And what we have been, trying to do within our organizational culture and within the organizations that we support is just to see that as a little bit more of an asset-based thing of like, accountability is how we live into our values. And hopefully that is a very generative and beautiful like process of growth.
Yeah, and I think there's another quote by Danielle Sered. I can find it afterwards, but where she talks about how accountability is to the person who committed harm, what healing is to the person who experienced harm. That it gives us a sense of closure. It can help us get to the other side, and that rather than seeing accountability as something that's forced upon us, it's something that almost like is a release or like a relief of a pressure valve rather than something that we're expected to do. And I think that's a really powerful way of thinking about it. And so we start with personal accountability, because I think sometimes when we're talking about accountability in a community or organizational sense, like Lee was talking about, there can be kind of this top-down framework of accountability, of like accountability to the rules, accountability to the assignments. And we believe that accountability should really operate from the bottom up, that if there's a norm of personal accountability, and then there's norms of relational accountability, that organizational accountability can build up from there. We're not being accountable because the people who are maybe higher in a hierarchy expect that of us. It's rather that like we all believe in accountability for ourselves and each other in like a lateral or horizontal sense. And then that actually allows for accountability to be something that leaders also have to their communities, that people have to their ancestors, that people have to the people who inspire them, rather than something that we're like accountable to the people who make assignments of us.
Yeah, and I've definitely observed that when folks are not starting from the personal and from the relational, that contributes to the culture that we can sometimes see of call outs and shaming and kind of like taking things to the social media or to the public sphere before just having a conversation with the person.
Yeah, and so I also love what I think Chris is saying in the chat about feeling a twitch in your right leg, which you interpret as relating to the base chakra, sense of certainty, stability, predictability. absolutely that I think that, especially, you know, I'm someone who has CPTSD. I think that I feel like a lot of the anxieties that I feel in my base chakra, and that sense of like believing that the people around me and that I am invited into accountability as a way of practicing love, as a way of finding that sense of stability, even when things adapt, is really, really supportive to me feeling much more safe in community with people, and not only much more safe with other people, but much more safe to feel like I can make mistakes. And that's really critical to that sense of being human with one another. Yeah. Okay. So,
and then just seeing from Kristen, relief of pressure, a sense of closure. Yeah. And relaxing your body.
yeah, and we can share these quotes with y'all in the follow-up email if you put your information in that Google Doc that Alina shared before.
Yeah, and Alina, could you maybe reshare that document for people to put in their email if people joined after that?
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you.
Okay, great. So these are two definitions of personal accountability that we like to bring into the space. The first is from Connie Burke. Accountability is an internal resource for recognizing and redressing the harms we have caused to ourselves and to others.
And Connie Burke is from the Northwest Network, right?
Yeah, and there's a piece, I think this quote is from Think, Rethink, which is a chapter in The Color of Violence by Incite Women of Color Against Violence. And I think there's also a PDF version online, so I can send the link to the full essay that this is from. Although content warning, it gets into some very specific examples of gender-based violence.
Yeah, and then the second quote, in Fumbling Toward Repair, Mariam Kaba and Shira Hassan share that there is no way to hold people accountable. People can only take accountability. Accountability is a continuous, active, voluntary process of being responsible to yourself and those around you for your choices and the consequences of your choices. Unlike punishment, it is something that we do rather than something that is done to us. And for us, coming from a background of teaching consent, this idea of it being continuous, active, and voluntary, there's a lot of similarities to consent culture, to accountability culture. And also, you know, as much as we want to sometimes try to control other people and say, you shouldn't talk like that, you shouldn't act that way, that's not okay. You can't change other people's behavior. You can give them feedback, you can have incentives, you can have consequences for violating community agreements. But, you know, this is really sharing that a lot of people start from saying, this person is being problematic, this person is creating an unwelcome environment. How can we make them stop that? You can't. You can start from your own commitments to inclusivity and anti-racism and how aligned you are with your own values. You can draw on your values and relationships to have conversations with people and invite them into accountability. But this is just a reminder that like other people are free and we can't force them to do things that they do not themselves choose to do.
And I think that when we get into really focusing on holding other people accountable, we have the highest probability of performative accountability, performative apologies that don't actually shift behavior. And so when someone chooses to step into accountability, I really like that last sentence, which punishment is passive. Punishment is something that's done to you. Punishment is something that you can feel victimized by. Accountability is something that, in my opinion, is much harder. You step into it, you choose to embrace it. And in a lot of ways, it's a lifelong commitment to figuring out how to unlearn whatever the root cause of that behavior was. And I think that sometimes when we're really focused on accountability, I really like that parallel between accountability and healing, because healing is a lifelong journey. It doesn't happen overnight. And I find the same thing with accountability. And often we'll start longer trainings asking people to share an example of a way that they perpetuated or believed in a system of harm in their life and what it looked like to unlearn that. And people are usually sharing many year processes, lifelong processes of unlearning what it means to be part of a settler, colonial project, what it means, the ways that we may have internalized fat phobia or anti-fatness, and trying to like unlearn that in our, and this kind of really intense ongoing process. Often arts and culture and media are such a big part of that transformation journey of reading a new book or watching a movie or creating something that helps you unpack the way that that's been a part of your life. And so when we then talk to people about, okay, what would it then look like to invite someone into that and to even help and facilitate that process, it starts to cause you to realize, well, if it truly is a lifelong journey of really unpacking all of that, then a lot of that is going to be something that that person needs to personally commit to and kind of be pursuing beyond whatever you invite them into. And the only way that's really going to be sustainable is if it's something that they choose.
Mm-hmm. And then resonating with what Julie is sharing in the chat, one of the reasons that that accountability is so personal is because it is to your own values, to your own commitments. And there often is a spiritual aspect to that of like, what are you here, to achieve in this lifetime? What do you like seek out and pursue? And so that is another reason why this is so personal, is that it is about the personal conscience, your personal values, your personal sense of
Ethics,
integrity and ethics in life.
Yeah. So this is when we're thinking about personal accountability. And when we scale that up to community accountability or accountability within our relationships and networks, I think a lot of people conflate transformative justice with community accountability processes. I would encourage you to check out the Creative Interventions Toolkit. They have some incredible tools for thinking about facilitating accountability in communities. But the reality is that what community accountability looks like can take an infinite number of forms, because it really depends on the norms of your own community. It depends on what feels authentic, what feels culturally appropriate within your environments, and that can look very, very different in different ecosystems.
Yeah, and we divided these a little bit, this aspect of task accountability and relational accountability, because it has been the source of a lot of tensions in our own working relationships, whether those are in informal projects or in the workplace, because maybe y'all have been part of conversations like this too, where you're trying to bottom line a project, people made commitments, they're not following through on those commitments, you have a conversation with them. That's often where people experience accountability in the workplace, is the manager, the coordinator, or someone saying like, hey, well, this is supposed to be done in 2 weeks and I haven't gotten a first draft, what's going on? And then it goes into the relational accountability of often the person is not doing okay or has other commitments or projects, or didn't maybe understand what they signed up for. I know for us, being the founders and kind of in charge of a lot of projects, often when we've what feels like gone after people around task accountability, they come back saying, I'm actually not okay, or I don't have the capacity to do this. And you coming after me about my assignments makes me feel like there's not relational accountability here, that you don't care about me as a person, or that our collective is more like transactional than I thought. And so just putting this out there, I think, especially around creative projects or around things where people have many commitments, they might be doing gig work where they have, this is one project among many, just this kind of like cycle or interplay between task accountability and relational accountability, and even just thinking intentions that you're having, which feels more relevant to you and which is feeling more relevant to the person. And if someone's saying like, I feel like you only care about my assignments, is there a way that you can show up for them more as a person or be more empathetic to what they're experiencing? And if you might also be really only able to empathize with what they're dealing with, and prioritizing that over getting done what you agreed to get done together. So just this feels very relevant in collaboration and in creative spaces.
I also think knowing people better and like what resonates with them can really help. Like when I was more focused on, we need to get this project done, you didn't do your components, that really aligns with certain people's working styles. And with other people, when I said like, I'm waiting on something from you for me to be able to take the next step on something for me. And the way that my neurodivergent brain works is that I'm getting stuck in all of my projects because I don't understand what's happening here and I can't keep track of the moving pieces. I just need you to communicate with me so that I can make the adjustments I need to structure my working time. That's a more relational way of talking about my needs and what hasn't been getting done in a way that I think encourages conversation and empathy rather than the focus on like the task isn't being completed. So knowing people, knowing what kind of vulnerability makes sense and feels authentic and won't be maybe overextending yourself either can make it feel like a much more open and honest conversation around these things. And then the next layer we wanted to get into is organizational accountability. And this is a definition that we pulled together, really thinking about our approach to organizational accountability at Spring Up. And we also run a day-long retreat on organizational accountability that folks can come to. I think it's next Friday. We do it 3 times a year. I'll share, I think this is the link. Yeah. I'll share the link in the chat. But if you're interested to learn more about organizational accountability, this is something that you can sign up for and spend the day with some of our team members mapping out what it can look like in your community or organization.
Yeah, so this definition of organizational accountability is a collection of strategies, philosophies, and systems that organizations, collectives, and coalitions can embrace to practice collective accountability. This practice grounds itself in the knowledge of who the organization is designed to be accountable to and what it is accountable for by implementing governance and feedback systems that center those directly impacted by the organization's mission and vision. Organizational accountability is about translating values into practice, practicing generative conflict, preventing and responding to harm without centering liability or the state, and responding to patterns of harm and conflict through emergent and adaptive organizational strategy. And so this is very wide-reaching. This can take many years to kind of live into this as an organization. But it would need to build on the earlier foundations of personal accountability and community accountability. So yeah, I know this has been a very extensive response, but I think that if what we're talking about is accountability, I think it's helpful to kind of peel apart. Like there isn't one neat definition, although if I were to try to do it in one sentence, I would say living into your values is accountability.
And holding the consequences of your actions. Yeah, so I can stop sharing my screen. I know we've shared a bunch of text with you all, but I thought if we were going to be reading long quotes, it would be better for you to be able to see the quotes on the screen as well. But yeah, those are our thoughts on what accountability means.
Thank you so much for diving a little bit deeper and talking about the different types of accountability. It's not a cut and dry. I didn't think you were going to give a cut and dry answer, but I wanted to open it up to people in this space too. Just like, yeah, if you want to expand on anything that that Stas or Leander said in the chat. We have a couple more questions too for them, but wanted to give people some space to comment or to ask questions if you'd like to.
This is Julie. I just wanted to really appreciate your slides and your conversation today regarding accountability. And I really like when you share, to have empathy, with the person, because unless you can actually feel what they feel, be in their shoes and not just to put a silver lining over it, it makes a big difference. And the second part was, to let them know, okay, I need your portion so that I can plan my next steps forward. Because I know with my organization, there's times when they will not have what I need, in an appropriate time. And so that I can move on or show the numbers of how, the fundraiser turned out. You just got to be more certain.
Thank you for sharing that, Julie. You cut out for one. Oh, there you are. You're back. Thank you so much for sharing that. Andre, I know you had your hand up as well. Oh, you're on mute.
Sorry. How do we support getting organizations, getting people personally to take that step towards accountability? I know I used to do a show called Race where we did this show and it was based off of real people's experiences that happened in Chicago. And it really illustrated a lot of real life situations, but people can watch from outside of the situation. And then we were trained by the Anti-Defamation League to have a conversation after the show. And I think it really helped some people take that first step towards accountability and having these safe conversations after the show. And we did this in middle schools, we did this in high schools, we did this at hospitals and other professional organizations. And so how do we find ways to do things like that where people can take that first step, but it's through maybe an avenue that's more supportive that we might not have thought of before?
Well, I love that show. Sounds really, really interesting. Thank you for what both of you shared. And I had something I want to say in response to Julie that I think connects to what you just said, and then I'll share another example, which is I often hear people talking about accountability to the work. We need to be accountable to our work. And I am a very rebellious person. Whenever you give me a rule, I'm going to try to break it, just because it seems like what I should do. And so when we focus on accountability to the work, I find myself resenting the work and being like, why? Whereas when I focus on accountability to people, which is often what draws me into the work, I feel a very different level of commitment rather than rebellion. And so when I think we need to be accountable to this mission, we need to be accountable to this work, it feels very capitalist and work oriented to me. Whereas when I say we need to be accountable to ourselves and our colleagues, we need to be accountable to the community that we serve, I feel a different level of desire to follow through. And so I think that that's a really critical difference for me in how we frame accountability. And I think that sometimes when we talk about accountability, this is kind of getting into what Andre was asking about. When we talk about accountability as in response to something that's gone wrong, it feels a lot scarier than we do when we do it proactively. And so a big kind of thing that we do is when we're mapping out a project or when we're working with an organization, we'll ask them, what is this project accountable to? Who are you accountable to, and what are you accountable to them for? And we'll make a map of that where we're actually talking about why are we doing this and how do we follow through on that? Or even with individuals, we have our values, but where do those come from, right? I feel so deeply accountable to my mother and my grandmothers and the ways that they brought me into a sense of relationality and mutual aid and commitment, right? And that's a big part of why reciprocity is a core value for me. It's because I feel committed and accountable to the people who brought me into those practices. I feel accountable to my life partner in creating a home and a life environment where we can truly be ourselves and be authentic, make mistakes, and be there for one another. I feel, I can be honest, I'm a bit of a messy person. I'm not the best at cleaning, which is certainly a point of contention for us. However, I feel very accountable to my animals, and I feel really accountable to creating a healthy and as minimally stressful environment for them. And so when it's not about, oh, you know, I need to clean because it's my time to do the chores, which I'll be annoyed about, but instead I'm looking around and I'm like, oh, I can tell that my cats are feeling anxious in the space. I feel a sense of commitment to creating an environment that works for them. And so like having those conversations, especially with young people or with people for whom this feels like a newer idea or where accountability feels scary, just talking about, well, who do you feel accountable to? And I think often starting with yourself. What are you accountable to yourself for? And what does that look like in the way that you design your life? Who are the ancestors? Who are the people who came before you that you feel accountable to? And how does that shape the way that you live into your values? If you have a spiritual practice, what kind of higher powers do you feel accountable to, and how does that shape the way that you want to show up in your life? And that's not in response to doing something wrong. It's about proactive planning, and then you can draw on that later on, whatever it is that happens.
Mhm. Yeah, that's very, I was also thinking about, yeah, like getting specific about who are you accountable to, because it's kind of contextualizing the accountability and making it relational. Whereas, just the idea of like, always follow through on what you say you're going to do, or like follow the rules. Like those are aspects of white supremacy culture. People have a lot of baggage from being, most of us were in educational systems that were top down or kind of controlling or about following the rules, or, grew up in families, maybe in different ways, but where, you were like afraid of getting in trouble, right? Or feeling like you wanted to like be good, right? And just that shapes the way that many people are socialized. And then coming into the workplace and the way that capitalism and white supremacy shapes how people relate to that, it makes sense to be like, to have a spirit of resistance to that, or to be like, you're not going to get more work out of me than you're paying for. And just to kind of like understanding that people have that baggage around being told what to do, and that is extremely valid and is also a reason why people might be, not being fully honest about the fact that they're not going to complete their deliverables, or that pushing through being sick to try to show up for things, which is such a issue in like performance, right? And like in doing things where it kind of is a problem if you're not able to show up for the event, which happens in, leading trainings and stuff as
Right.
well. People do push through being sick, and so I don't know, just contextualizing that, especially if we're talking about anti-racism, in like why, because it's very different for us with our friends and family and people that we've been in grassroots organizing with, how accountability shows up there and how obviously relational it is, then to, as soon as you start paying people, even if it is for like gig work. And so for us, revaluing this type of like community and creative labor is a big part of our existence as an organization. And so paying people for the trainings that they do, paying people so that it can subsidize other work they do in community that is unpaid. We were surprised at how much baggage that brought in, because it's like, we are friends, we have a relationship, we have shared commitments, and yet even paying you a small amount turns this into a work thing and brings in all this stuff where it's like, I'm pressuring you and I feel like let down, and all these things. And so particularly if folks are working in organizations with people, for us, thinking about like, we try to bring a lot of like student data and feedback into our team meetings, so that it's not just that we're like trying to be great, but that we like hear what our students are saying they need, especially around their access needs and their like learning goals. And people feel very accountable to that.
Right. And so it feels like we're evaluating ourselves based on how the people that we are accountable to feel about what we're providing to them, not based on some perfectionistic ideal of being evaluated by a manager.
Thank you for expanding on that as well. And for Julie, for your comments, and Andre, you posing that question. I think that was very fruitful for people to hear that. I think one of the things that I wanted to do for participants in the room before we kind of talk a little bit deeper about this is just for people that are in the space, you can put it in the chat, you can unmute, whatever feels comfortable, but what do you identify are your own barriers to accountability? Not, you can say them for yourself, but I'm actually really curious about what are the barriers to accountability within your organization? I would say the majority of people that are in this room are not executive directors, are not people who are in positions of power, but exists in those systems and are harmed by those systems. And so I'm curious if people want to put in the chat, here are the ways in which I think this is a barrier, like shame. Shame is a barrier to harm. This is how it shows up. But just wanting to people to maybe chime in the chat of like, what do you think, what are some barriers to accountability that stand in the way of harm repair? Equity. Mhm. What are some more barriers? We talked about shame, ego. Yes, that's a good one. I think for me personally, things that have stood in the way of my own accountability have been this idea of like, I immediately get embarrassed because I've done something wrong and I don't want to be seen as like a bad person. I also don't want to be uncomfortable. I'm a Cancer. So I'm like, no, I'm going to go back in my shell. Y'all figure it out. I didn't mean to. So, and I used to exist in that framework for a really long time. And it took losing a relationship that was really important to me to come to a realization of like, I am a really defensive person. What is that about? Can I think back on like, oh, I did have this experience when I was younger, that level of shame and not having the coping skills when I was young to know how to navigate that completely shut me down up and like through my 20s. And that was something that happened in elementary school, but it just built on top of each other because there was never any other new relationship to when I've caused harm. It doesn't mean I'm always going to get punished or have a big Mexican Catholic family. Like you spank your kids in that space. I'm fine, as you can see. But that was like a real thing for me of like, I don't want to get a spanking. I don't want to get grounded. But more importantly, I don't want to be labeled as a bad person. Embarrassment, shame, that lets defensive-ness. And then that harmed my relationships and my ability to like take accountability when I caused harm, right? I just wanted to go back. One of the people were saying fairness is that everyone must be treated the same regardless of their personal circumstances. Let's see, tradition or how it's been done before and the belief that we lack resources. So like not a comment on human resources, like individuals who work within human resources, but the institution of organizational HR is not meant for people. It's been rebranded in some spaces as like people and culture. I'm like, that even feels even more gaslighty to me than just saying HR. I know that HR is like not, typically I've not had good experiences when it has come to like, hey, this harmful thing happened to me. That's not what happened. You misunderstood. Again, they said they wouldn't do it again. He's going to take a class. Don't work in that part of the office, or, things that weren't like, I'm sorry that happened to you. That shouldn't have happened. How can we, again, what does it mean to reclaim your sense of safety? Like, what do you need? Here's some ideas I have. Are you okay inviting this person into a process, right? People are putting, yes, Sorry, one sec. Yeah, being unclear about what the other person needs or wants and afraid or confused in how to ask. We talk about that a lot when we were talking about disrupting harm. Like, well, what if I make someone mad? What if they're like, you don't speak for me? Or that might happen, right? That's a part of that process. No affinity groups, not having spaces for that, fear of compounding the harm by asking in the wrong way. Yeah, does anybody want to share verbally? I think Chris, maybe.
Can you hear me? I was just going to say that your point, Alina, about the amount of aversion to shame, I think is really, really important. I similarly had a realization that I also had this self-limiting belief that I probably adapted while I was a child as a way to survive trauma that essentially equates what I deserve to what I do. So, you know, I realized that, you know, in the hyper visible upbringing that I had, you know, if you did something wrong, negative things happened to you. And I especially noticed that that was not the case for everybody. So as a Black person, dark skinned, in poverty, we were hyper surveilled and underprotected. And so, you know, I learned to be very, very good at things just as a way to survive, right? And I'm now realizing that that prevents vulnerability and also prevents true connection, which are really needed for accountability, right? And so there's always that tension between, you know, how authentic, how much do I belong, how safe do I and secure do I feel in this community, you know, and if you're not secure, you're not actually going to offer up accountability, right? And so, you know, I just wanted to offer that.
I really appreciate you sharing that, Chris. And I think it's important, again, just to re-acknowledge for people that it is not lost on me that having been someone who's been in an organization before where I couldn't get accountability, harm kept happening, and I had to make a decision like, this is impacting me so negatively that I just have to leave. There is no other. I've tried all of these avenues for repair. I've tried being vulnerable, and that has only caused harm. And I also want to acknowledge that. So there's this acknowledging like sometimes we got to get out. Sometimes we get out, but are still carrying that trauma in our body. And now we're in a new organization that's maybe trying to do something different, that's trying to have a different accountability process. But it is really hard to get out of the trauma that we're still holding. Like, what does it look like to heal from those things? Well, that's a deeper, that's a whole nother lunch and learn workshop. And just like Stas and Leander acknowledged earlier, that's lifelong work. Our healing, it takes a long time. But do we have the freedom and the space and the safety to explore what healing looks like, to be able to ask for what we need? And I think that's really powerful what you shared, Chris, of like, do I have that relationship? Do I feel safe being vulnerable? Am I in a safe environment? If I'm not, how do I even get to this process? I want to give you time to ask questions. And Claire, I know you put a question in the chat that I want to get to. But before we get to that question, obviously this has been a series because we can't cover things in one session and having an ongoing conversation. But I'm curious for people who maybe are in those organizations who aren't quite there yet in terms of like, how do we create different processes for harm repair or for accountability? What does it look like to begin to shift the culture in that organization or in an organization that, and maybe that's not possible. Maybe, you know, I talk about this a lot in SACA, like sometimes we're seed planters. All we can do is plant the seed and someone has to come in and water it because it'll be our time to shift out and to be in a different space. But But I'm just curious of like, how do we begin to create and explore those new ideas and new processes for accountability and harm repair? That's a big question. I know it's complicated, but I'm just curious what you two, what you think, Stas and Leander. Oh, and Julie, yeah, if you want to share real quick before stop. Oh, you're on mute.
Okay, thank you. So I do have my nonprofit 501(c), which is Hope Angels Ministry, and I also work as a hospital staff chaplain. So what I have done for harm repair, as I mentioned, I'm a change agent. I've got one class away before I received my doctorate in bioethics, and I'm just sold out on restorative justice. I did my first capstone. I wanted to do my first stone on restorative justice, but they said, no, that's too big, that's too big. But my second one will be restorative justice and healthcare. And that's where the meat of what it is to be connect with the community, to connect with the BIPOC community. That's a blessing. And that's what I'm doing now with my 501(c) is that I'm putting in $25,000 to make sure that they've got mentors and they've got teachers in that section in King County. So that's one way to do harm repair for me. And I'm sure there's other ways. And I think we're all in it together. We all got great ideas. We just got to put that circle and inside of it, put to it, get to it, round to it. Thank you.
Thanks, Julie.
Thank you, I
Yeah,
appreciate-
Stas, Leander. Yeah.
Yeah, and I did want to say also that I do appreciate the like personal sharing and reflection that people have been doing, and not just making it about the workplace, but about, you know, your particular experience and particular socialization. I think that that is really important, and that, you know, one of the ways that white supremacy operates is through universalizing frames of like, we should all do this if we all just did this. And so we wanted to share something about differentiation too when it comes to accountability, because as Chris was talking about, based on our background, some of us were socialized to be under accountable, and to kind of get the benefit of the doubt. And then some of us were socialized to be over accountable and kind of like made to feel accountable for things that were not our responsibility.
Yeah, when we were talking about obstacles to accountability, I was thinking a lot about like the way that I've internalized perfectionism and done a lot to unlearn that, but that so much of that came from my family always saying, you know, Black people need to work twice as hard to get half as far. And just this expectation that other people can do things in a less perfect way and be celebrated for it, and that I would do things at the same quality and not be recognized. And I would have to be so exceptional to be able to expect to just meet my basic needs. And that while I think that that is responsive to a reality of systems of oppression, that I think that it is true that that bias shows up, it's also been really important for me to choose how I want to relate to that, and how I want that to shape my own behavior and my own expectations, and how that contributed to a sense of defensiveness of I could never be good enough. And so kind of frustration whenever anything seemed to be going wrong, because the only way I could be successful was if I was perfect, and that any mistake that I made was justification for me not being able to meet my needs. And I think just shifting that internalized sense to be like, no, what's that quote? Like, I want to have the confidence of a mediocre white man, which is a pretty judgmental thing to say, but I really think that that's like a big thing for me, is like building up a sense of confidence, no matter how I show up, that I'm deserving of love. And kind of recognizing that I had internalized a sense of over accountability, of the only way that I could be person who contributed to a team, or the only way that I could be an effective leader was if I was accountable for everything under the sun, took responsibility for absolutely everything, and that aligned with people's expectations of me. And so coming into a space of centered accountability has been really, really difficult. And that's something that we talk a lot about as a team that I think has really shaped our understanding of equity rather than equality, of like, how do we have a differentiated sense of what accountability looks like for each of us. And so this quote is from the book, The Politics of Trauma by Stacey Haynes. And it's talking about how accountability, what it looks like to have centered accountability can be different for each of us depending on what we were socialized into. And so the quote says, our social norms tend toward polarization, blame, or litigation, rather than a nuanced ability to hold complexity and encourage accountability, mending, and justice. Centered accountability can hold complexity, both be accountable and know what is not our responsibility while staying connected and in relationship. Often we will lean toward being either under or over accountable. Over accountability is taking on blame, responsibility, and fault automatically. It is taking this on for people and situations that we may have wanted to be able to affect or want to now, yet did not or do not have the power to do so. Under accountability is avoidance of, dodging, deflecting, and or denying accountability. We are under accountable when we avoid affecting things within our spheres of influence or don't face mistakes and impacts we have had with good intent and responsibility.
So we could spend days or weeks talking about this, right? And kind of talking about how this has affected each of us individually, or maybe, you know, if you have a good friend you talk to about things like this, or a therapist, like screenshot this and bring it there, right? But this is really deep, and I think this is part of the cultural problem around accountability and living in a racist society, is that it is a trauma response to be over accountable or to be made to feel over accountable for things that are just not within your control. And then it is a internalization of supremacy that, you know, may show up in people socialized as men, or in white people, or in people with a lot of class privilege, to be under accountable, to just really feel that defensiveness and like, it's not my problem, that's just the way the world is, right? And so when we see both of those showing up, that creates a society where the people who are generally in power are not using that power, and the people who are, you know, generally boxed out of power are just really working too hard and burning out. And so we would all need to be doing work to shift those norms, and also to be shifting the ways that we treat each other. I know there's a really good piece in Leah Lakshmi's care work called Protect Your Heart, which is about leaders that are women of color or feminized people who are disabled, and just the really unreasonable and unsustainable expectations that people have when people of those identities step into leadership. And yet we say we want more diverse leaders, right? But so we need to be able to like treat people from marginalized backgrounds with like grace and support and humanity when you step into leadership positions, not expect people to be superhuman. And so
it's been very interesting to see it happen, because now we've worked with hundreds of organizations, and when we see the kinds of expectations of very privileged leaders compared to the expectations that are put on leaders who are queer femmes of color or disabled Black women or whatever, the expectations are so radically different. And even for the two of us as a co-leadership team, the way that people expect a degree of emotional labor from me is really not the same as they expect from Lee. And so we see it all the time. And we see when there are leaders with a lot of privilege, maybe, and this happens in general, but maybe a project is expected to be completed on just a completely unreasonable time frame. But the leaders are under accountable. And so the expectation is for the rest of the team to be over accountable for doing superhuman tasks and being responsible when they don't meet those, right? And so that under and over accountability match each other, because when someone's under accountable, there's a gap in accountability. And those of us with marginalized identities are often expected to, or maybe believe that there should be accountability and end up stepping into that accountability and being over accountable. And yet at the same time, many of us who are women of color, femmes of color, people of color in general, queer and trans people, we're kind of socialized to apologize for our existence, socialized to apologize for the world, right? And I think a lot about the chapter that's why are we apologizing all the time, and what if we stopped? That's from the book The Body Is Not an Apology by Sonia Renee Taylor. And just like, I think that some people need to be apologizing more and need to be more accountable. And some of us also need to be asking ourselves, why do we feel responsible for everything all the time and are just never able to live into the expectations that are put on us?
Yeah, and I think maybe we can stop screen sharing. And I would say to the question as I understood it, which is about kind of how can we start moving more towards accountability? How can our organizations and communities be more accountable? I don't think that there's a quick fix or like a meeting you can have with your staff or the people you live with to like become accountable. I do think it is a lifelong process of learning, and that this is something that adults really need to focus on and learn, both so that we can like model that for the next generation and so that we can like move into new patterns in our own lifetimes. And I know for us as millennials, kind of like moving into more positions of leadership, just feeling like, how do we not just replicate the bad things that we went through, or just say like, well, I'm being a lot nicer to you than my manager was to me, so I don't know what you're complaining about. Just that is also kind of, it's hard to recognize that you are now the adult and you are the one in power and you are the one kind of like representing that to people. And so, yeah, I think that as far as, I think it was Claire's question, that is something that we can do coaching around. And we can also do conversations like this with your organization if you'd like.
Or that day-long retreat on harm system design that I mentioned really digs into that and can be supportive for folks who are starting something, or for folks who have a lot of power in their organization to shift norms in something that already exists.
Yeah, and then we have a transformative justice course that we'll be offering again in the fall. And sometimes we encourage people to take that with colleagues or with people you live with or with close friends to be able to like, that course focuses more on the personal skills and on the like personal shifting away from norms of punishment and shame. And so if folks want to do, I think if you're thinking more about how your organization can incorporate that, the harm systems design retreat next week would be really supportive.
It's offered again in the fall.
Right. And if you want to do more like personal learning, I'd be happy to see any of you all in our transformative justice course. And then, yeah, if you just want like support or a space like this with your organization, feel free to fill out that collaborate with us form. That's what Alina did. And here we are.
That's why we're here.
Yes. So yeah, I would just say we really want to be a resource to people in having these conversations and like moving towards these shifts. And so don't hesitate to reach out to us if you think that we could support you in that.
Thank you so much for getting to those questions. Ashley, I did not mean to send you that directly. I'm going to reshare the sign-in sheet just one more time, just in case you didn't get a chance to fill it out. I am so grateful that we've had this time together. Thank you both so much for your time and your insight. I wanted to give space for one more question, and then I wanted to drop in a survey that Stas, oh my God, Stas and Leander shared at the beginning, just for some feedback. So I hope that Claire, that answered your question of just like, maybe we have some practical resources to share with people, but I wanted to see if anybody had one more question before we close out together.
I would just share one more thing related to what Claire
Yeah,
asked,
please.
which is we also have a free resources page on our website that has a lot of different things there, dozens of free resources. And one of those is also the How to Work With Me guide, which is something that we encourage people to all fill out to kind of decenter white supremacist norms in your organization, to really understand people's access needs, their values, how they approach work. And that there's a bunch of other resources on there that I would encourage, especially if you're starting something, or I mean, really in so many ways, but just wanted to put that out there because they're free resources. We just launched this last month. I'm very excited about it, and you're very welcome to share it more widely as well.
Thank you so much for adding that in there. Y'all, if you, once we close, if Stas and Leander, if you'll stay for a second after we finally wrap up. I wanted to, so I'm going to drop the survey in there for people. I know surveys aren't, I actually like surveys depending on who they're from, but it'll only take a minute, and I know it's helpful to Stas and Leander. I went ahead and put it in the chat. See, super brief. If y'all want to fill that out and just take a minute to do that while we still have some time together. I just wanted to give lots of praise for our ASL interpreters, for Bob, and for Alina. It's so weird saying my name, your name, our name, but just wanted to share some love and gratitude. We always provide interpretation feedback from the deaf and hard of hearing community of like, this is one less step we have to take. The labor is not on us to be accessible, and it's a privilege that SACA has the resources to do that. So just again, thank you to Alina and to Bob for supporting us today. I will say also they jumped in at the last minute because we had some changes. So a lot of gratitude to both of them. And then the last thing I wanted to do was I just wanted to take a screenshot, a picture, because I'm a nerd. So if you will turn on your camera for a picture, again, you don't have to. This is just like a nerdy thing that I like to do. But if you want to take a picture, just send some love and gratitude to Stas and Leander. I'll count to 3 so you can all smile or do something funny or whatever. Okay, we're gonna take a picture in 3, 2, 1. You all look beautiful. Yay. Thank you so much. Did I smile? Okay, I think that I did. Thank you so much for being here, everyone. If you signed up, we'll send the resources, we'll send the sign-up sheet. I'll send the survey again in case you didn't have time to do it here. And then I will get the recording edited and sent out. SACA has a lot of events coming up. So subscribe to our newsletter if you want to know about those events. They will always be free for you. And this is not the last session we're doing on restorative justice. We're doing a continual series that'll go to the end of the year. So stay tuned. Thank you so much. Again, Stas, Leander, thank you for being here and for sharing space with us. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Alina,
Yeah.
that is weird to say. I don't think I've said it just it was a pleasure to work with you. All of you. Stas and Leander, thank you.
You might want to stop recording.
Yes, thank you. Okay, hold on.